Hello, my name is Jacob Brock.
I'm Wesley Simpson.
I'm Cooper Tolson.
And we are going to show you guys all how to make the best apple pie you've ever had.
So I'm going to start off with apple pie origins. We didn't just get apple pies and pies like we know today. It started somewhere. It started in ancient Egypt as the earliest recorded pie, but it's not the pie we think of today. It is spices and bread, and it's probably not very good if we were all to try it. Also, there are pies that they used to make back in like medieval days, where it'd be called a mock pie. They'd throw animals in there, they'd throw like midgets in there and surprise people. They weren't exactly for eating, but they were just for a gag and for a surprise. Also, now that they have moved into like our culture, they're one of our top desserts. I mean, if you think of dessert, you probably think of apple pie or some kind of pie, and obviously now that's way different than what it used to be. Our pie is much different than that pie, and most pies you would think of as we have a crust, and Jacob's going to talk about that.
So this pie all started about 40 to 50 years ago when my great-grandma, she loved to make pies. But my great-grandpa, he was told by the doctor that he had too high cholesterol. So my great-grandma, being the wise woman she is, decided not to make the crust with 2 pies because that is too much cholesterol, but with 1 pie as to decrease the cholesterol in the apple pie. And this recipe was really passed down generation to generation, and now it's come to me and it's been perfected over the past few decades, and now I'm going to share it with you guys. So the first most important ingredient is the apples. So Cooper is going to demonstrate how to peel the apples. It's very important. We do not want any skin on these apples at all. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about also the apples themselves. So you want to make sure that you get Honey-Crisp apples. This is probably one of the most important parts of the whole pie. So Honey-Crisps are really important because first off, they're not as tart as Granny Smiths. They're not, and they're delicious. Another common apple is way too soft. The Gala just isn't sweet enough, and so the Honeycrisp really provides the perfect apple for making an apple pie. And this apple was really actually created 30 years ago, genetically engineered to be how it is. Its cells are twice the size, which also gives it the crunch that everybody knows the Honeycrisp for. And now I'm going to show you guys how to chop the apple safely. So you want to grab it by the sides, just put the knife right down through the middle, and chop. And so first you want to make sure you get all the apple peel off, like so. And usually we throw these in the garbage, but right here is fine for now. And then you also don't want any of the core in the apple. That would make for a little bit too much of a crunch if you bit into a seed. So you just go around, kind of just cut out the core of the apple. And we're only going to show you guys just one of these today because really the most time-consumptive part of the apple pie is really peeling the apples. Almost finished here. And then you want to make sure that the slices are not too big and not too small. So maybe 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch in thickness. And this will make sure that when you stack up the apples that you don't have too many apples because there's more ingredients that go into that we'll show you later.
And then while he's doing that, while he's finishing that, I'm going to talk about how to make the filling or the cinnamon sugar mixture, which would go on top of the apples inside the pie. So we're going to take our apples that we cut up. We're going to be adding those in a pan, but first we're going to make the cinnamon sugar mixture. So we're going to start off, and this is more of a preference thing. As we made our first pie, it was more of a preference thing. It is 3 parts sugar to 1 part cinnamon. And that's just basically a basic cinnamon sugar recipe you would use if you were to make, like, let's say cinnamon toast or something like that. So we're going to start off. Pour sugar. Let me cover time over the slide. And this cinnamon is what really gives it cinnamon flavor and a darker color with the apples. Mix that around. So I prefer more cinnamon, so that's why I put a little bit more. You might normally.
So the uncommon ingredient in all this is actually the flour. And you'd be surprised what the flour actually does. If you ever think of an apple pie, you really think it's typically gooey, right? That actually comes straight from the flour. So when you bake the flour and all the juices get boiling up from the apples, mixed with the flour, it creates that really delicious, gooey, sugary deliciousness that really is trademark of the apple pie. So when you have the cinnamon sugar and the apples sliced and cut, what you want to do is just add the flour, and actually I'm going to start making the crust too. So the crust is probably really one of the other really important parts of the apple pie, obviously. Without that, it'd just be apples and some sugar and flour, and not as good. So, just a sec, mess this up a little bit.
So my part, I'm going to now, this is kind of a hard part, a little messy, but I'm going to pour this over these and try and combine them in the best way I can.
So with this, you want to make sure that you get a nice mixture, but I'm going to start the crust. So what goes into it, 2 cups of flour. You can really just do 1 spoon of salt, or you just shake a little bit in. And then you need Crisco. Now this is not butter, common misconception. It's Crisco. And it's really important to not use, well, you can use butter, but the traditional recipe that my great-grandma and my grandma and my father have used generation to generation, use Crisco. Take this, you want about ½ cup of Crisco. Now, we obviously made one before, so I actually have just the right amount left. Take this, really want to have it kind of in smaller chunks because you're going to be mixing this with your hands. So this part gets a little bit dirty, but it's much more simpler than actually using a fork.
And while he's doing that and I'm doing this, Cooper's going to talk to you about his story and his personal connection to pie, I guess.
So unfortunately with apple pie, I have a cinnamon allergy to it, which actually goes through my whole family. So instead of apple pie on the traditional like holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas, we always do rhubarb pie, which is kind of an odd thing for like people to make. And yeah, just every Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's just like the traditional dessert that we have after our meals and stuff.
So I also have a story, I feel pretty strongly about apple pie in a positive way because every November, Thanksgiving night, we would go over to my family friend's house, and the wife makes a awesome apple pie and puts ice cream on it, and it is to die for. And it is honestly what I look forward to going home for Thanksgiving, and so that's why I love the idea of me being able to make this pie in my dorm and things like that.
So, as you're mixing in the Crisco and the flour and the salt, you want to really look for a crummy texture. It shouldn't stick together yet. That's coming in the next step. But basically, you want to add and add Crisco until you really get a nice crummy texture. So I'm actually going to use.
And as you guys saw me do that, pouring, it's important to have a little bit over because as you can see on that pie, it sinks in a little bit and it's going to kind of release all that moisture and kind of soak down and be the pie that it is. So it's important to put enough apples and not be like, oh, I don't want to go over the rim. This is a good amount.
So yeah, like I just said, it just takes time and time to really get that Crisco really mixed thoroughly through the flour. Now you see we're getting there pretty close to that crummy texture. You kind of see it's pretty crumbly, not obviously as soft as it was before with the flour. But I'm going to add a little bit more Crisco to kind of scoop out all the rest that we got here. And last step, after you get all the flour nice and evenly so it's nice and crummy, then what's next is you want to add water. So this will give it finally its doughy texture. And basically what you want to do is add a few spoonfuls at a time, because you got to find the perfect in between of not too crumbly but not too sticky, because you want to be able to actually lift the pie up or the crust up and put it onto the apples. But if it's too crumbly, you won't be able to do that. If it's too sticky though, then you will end up with not the best crust. It won't taste as good. It won't be what it should be.
When you think of crust for an apple pie or other pies, you think of this crumbling apart and kind of being, I don't know, dusty. This is the characteristic of pies we know.
So you want to keep adding water until the pie, or until the dough. So this is the part that takes the longest aside from topping up the apples. You want to keep adding water until you can form the dough into a ball. So add just a little more water. And it's always better, I think we made a little bit too much dough, but it's always better to have more dough than have not enough dough. Because you can always cut around the edges of the pie after you set it down.
So I'm laying down flour right now because when we roll out that dough, as any baker knows, you don't want the dough / pie mixture to stick to the table. We want to be able to lift it up and actually put it on our pie. So that's what I'm doing.
Alright, so this is getting pretty good.
So as you can see, you can make that into a ball. It's kind of the dough
so
consistency we want.
obviously you can see, make it into a ball. So we want to just get this out, get all the dough out. Kind of pack it together as much as you can. Lay it down. And then take a rolling pin. It's also a good idea as well to grab a little flour and make sure that your rolling pin won't stick to the dough as well. Because if that happens, then you could have some not so much fun things happen to your dough. So
Now
it
what
makes it just harder and harder to put onto your pie.
Now what I'm doing is I'm adding butter to this. It might sound like a step you wouldn't normally think of, but this is what would give the gooiness and I guess the texture that you would have at the bottom of the pie or the middle of the pie. So I'm just going to spread some butter across this.
And so it's really helpful because the crust is so sticky. Have a spatula on hand. It's really helpful. Kind of get under there, move it around if you need to. And you want to get it just so it's a little bit bigger than the actual pan itself.
Sometimes when you are rolling out the crust, it gets kind of too crumbly. So what you do if that happens is just put it back in the bowl and then add more water until you think it's good, and put it back on the table and roll it out again.
That's the great thing about the dough is, since it's not on the pie yet, it's always you're always able to change it up a little bit and really make it so it's a pie that fits your preference. Because if you're not going to like the pie, then why would you make the pie?
And after Jacob making this a couple times this year, he's noticed that he wanted to add or subtract different parts to make it, his preferred pie.
You also want to make sure the crust isn't too thick or too thin. It should be right around of a 1/4 inch thickness, maybe a little more. If it's any thicker, then the crust will be too thick and it'll be really hard to break through and might not bake all the way through. If it's too thin, then it'll be even more difficult to put onto your pie. So as you can see, this is now rolled out and it's just a little bit bigger than the pan. So
While we're doing this, Cooper is setting up a Kahoot that's going to follow this presentation. And that will be to determine the winner of who's going to take this pie. And you can cook it at your house.
I hope you were paying attention. This is the big one. All right, so while you're lifting up the dough to the pie, very good.
And as you guys can see, we have extra dough. So in places we don't have dough, it's not a circle, we're just taking it and throwing it in the sides.
And last step is to cut holes in the crust and make sure that any steam that's trapped inside can get out. And that there is how you make the best apple pie ever. You go ahead. Everybody joined up?
Is everyone in?
No.
This will be really, really quick.
It's not, it's on you guys. And while they're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and cut up this pie. Did everybody want pie? Anybody not want pie? 2, 3, 6, 8.
Is everyone in?
I don't want to. We'll split.
Well, I'm on the ring. I just want the ring. And a tiebreaker will go to record scissors.
No, we have to.
Of course, I tried 4 places.
And let's get up there.
Yes, yes.